Hi everyone. Welcome to the Speakers Bank podcast. I am your host Zeki. As well with me is Camille, Nathan, and Storm. So just gonna move
Hi
straight.
everyone,
Hello.
Hi.
how's everyone doing today?
We're really good.
Good.
Excited to jump in?
Yes, super excited. Cannot wait. So we'll be discussing basically the NDIS and the new scheme. Well, less more the new scheme, but I guess the review of the scheme and the 29 changes that are implemented. So I guess what we're going to discuss is basically how the NDIS systems are changing and how they're going to be providing more challenges towards us. So I guess the first question to everyone out here is, how do we feel this new scheme provides more equity?
Personally, I think the NDIS needs, let's just say, a lot of work.
Mhm.
And I think that the things that are proposed to change are the very things that need to stay, if not be made better, as opposed to be taken away altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
That's interesting, yeah.
I think what they're doing is they're saying that they're trying to make a fair system, but in actual fact, it's not a fair system because it's taking the empowerment of people with disabilities away from making the correct choices. Because what you'll find is that people with disabilities, they need to make good decisions, but good informed decisions as well.
Mhm.
And sometimes when we're under pressure, we can make wrong decisions. That's the reason why we need to have backup from our GPs, from our other services that we use to make sure that we're making an informed decision. I feel like by doing this, it's interrupting the actual format of what.
And the thing is too, one of the core things that the NDIS was built on was not just, simply reasonable and necessary, but it was about the, choice and control. It was emphasizing that the person with the disability, or, the carer that had, guardianship over them, or the parent or whoever, could make, informed choices and had that, control and the ability to say yes, no, maybe, let me think about it.
Yeah. So do you feel that this new scheme provides more fairness with the NDIS and the the NDIS participants?
I think the problem is, and I'm not sure about Storm or any of you guys, but I know in my experience, it's very much been like, to use the analogy, it's very much like a blanket where, we basically, we hand out funds to everybody. Everyone gets roughly, anywhere from, let's say, 30,000 to, sometimes in rare cases, $100,000. And basically, it's just essentially, grab whatever you feel that you need. Whereas I think what the NDIS needs to do is actually really sit down with someone properly and say, not just, regarding what, you feel that you need or what will fund, but rather they need to sit down and go through every detail of your life and tailor a plan that's exactly specific for you. Say, for example, my plan has about $60,000 in it, and 3,000 of that is consumables. But realistically, someone who's got, let's just say, paraplegia, for example, might have $8,000, but in a former life, I guess you could say, they were once able-bodied, whereas, for example, those people can, potentially take themselves, to the toilet or whatever, whereas I can't. But, because of the way the system works, they'll naturally get, say, $8,000 in consumables, whereas I'm stuck with 3. So it's kind of that, they need to focus on equity rather than equality.
Hmm.
So basically what you're saying, Nathan, is you're worried that your needs are not going to be met through the new scheme that's being
Yeah, well,
proposed.
in fact, Storm, with the proposed changes, they're actually looking at saying, okay, we're going to not only take away essentially, and I say in quotes, your rights, but they're also looking at in one of the proposed drafts, I should say, of which there are about 78 potential ones, they're actually looking at saying, okay, we'll take away reasonable and necessary. So let's say, for example, if you can walk into, I'll say hypothetically, if you can walk into like a kitchen store and get an electronic pepper grinder, for example, you normally are currently, able to do that. But under the new proposed scheme, you won't be able to buy anything unless it is specific to your disability and sold in a disability specific store. And they're also looking at further saying, well, we're going to now control where and when you can spend your money and basically cap it. So like, for example, at the moment, I spend on average, I think in my last plan, about $10,000 in consumables. My entire budget is only about, at maximum, around 3,000. And it's one of those things where they'll eventually get to the stage where they'll basically say, we won't fund anything unless it's directly related to your disability and very disability specific, and anything you bought previous to that any other person could use but is good for your disability, we're basically going to create a debt that you're going to have to pay off. Now, for someone like my wife and I, that's in the realm of $10,000 to $15,000 that we would never pay back in our lifetime.
Right, and
if that were to go through.
Right, and that's where the problem actually is, because you are saying to the NDIS, I know what's right for my body, I know what works for me. You need to give me freedom to scope what works for me. But essentially, with this new scheme, you are not able to do that because you are locked in, because the scheme doesn't allow you to explore other options. So that is a very, very bad thing.
That's exactly right. So to give you another quick example, one of the only reasons I'm having a conversation with you right now, post, heightened pandemic, is the fact that when the pandemic hit, for months, say from about just after I got married up until July last year, I couldn't go to the gym because they obviously, for safety reasons, they had to shut everything down. The problem with that was because I couldn't really, my house isn't set up for me to do exercise at home. My brain basically melted into a puddle to the point where I essentially struggled to hold a conversation. Now, having suspected ADHD, that's already a struggle with medication. So the only thing that really worked to try and get me back up to scratch in combination with medication was to do puzzles. Now, for example, and I'm talking like, jigsaw puzzles of varying price. And it's one of those things where, yes, anyone can go and buy a puzzle, but it was the only thing that worked for me, because everything regarding, dexterity and cognitive development that was for people with disabilities was for basically 4 or 5-year-olds, where like the only thing that worked for me, for example, was to buy Lego, Lincoln Logs, puzzles, things that adults and kids would do. And so under this new scheme, it's basically that saying, sorry, you can't buy a puzzle, or you can't buy some Lego and, work on your dexterity and your cognitive development.
Yeah, and I guess my response to the question is it's actually stopping your development as a person with a disability.
Yeah.
So you're not actually gaining anything from this.
Yeah.
All it's doing is it's just saving money for the government. It's not actually helping you in the long term. It's sort of like saying, okay, we understand you have a condition. We'll help you to a certain point, but we won't help you outside our criteria that we feel like needs to be met. But they're not asking us, all of us, what are actually the criteria that we need.
Yeah.
So they're only looking at it from a government point of view. They're not looking at it as a whole, and that's the most frustrating part.
And the problem with that is you're basically saying to, you know, for example, like someone could argue with me tomorrow and say, well, you know, for example, things like Lego and, you know, puzzles and all these different construction things, they're basically hobbies, you know, we shouldn't have to fund that. But the reality is, for me, it's still, I class that as, you know, a hybrid between work and a hobby, because it's still very difficult for my brain, to the point where,
Absolutely.
you know, just to rest my brain, I have to go and watch a movie or play, you know, some Xbox to try and, you know, save some energy, because it's still a very difficult task for me to do. Like, it's not, but it's one of those things where it's like, if you're going to have to do some kind of, you know, therapy to get your cognition or your dexterity up, you kind of want to make it enjoyable, because the last thing you want
absolutely, I agree. I 100% agree.
Another chore.
I guess that leads me into my next question for both of you as well, is what would you feel you'd want changed in the NDIS currently to make it more better support, or a more of a better system that will work for both of you, more compatible even?
Well, for me, it's about freedom of choice. I think you need to have a system that is flexible around the choices that work for you. Because going by this new scheme, we're pretty much putting all of our eggs into one basket and leaving the fate of our plan to this independent what's the word? Assessor. Yeah, that's it. The independent assessor who's going to determine your future and your funding with your NDIS, and that is not right. What the actual thing that should actually work is the people that know you the best. They're the ones that should determine what's best for you, because I honestly feel very, very uncomfortable about a person coming into my own house or whatever area that they suggest, sitting you down for 3 hours and trying to get to know you in 3 hours. It's just impossible, because what happens if your background is on cerebral palsy, but they don't have any background in cerebral palsy? How are they gonna assess you to a proper standard? I just cannot see it working unless you've got some sort of background in the disability that you're coming up with. It's not going to work. And then having that pressure to say, I want this and I want that in 3 hours is just too much. It's too much pressure. I understand why the government's doing it, because they want to save money, but at the same time, you've got to look at the person's needs and wants. And the last thing that they're going to do under pressure is say, I want this and want this. And when there's someone hassling you to ask you what you need, you're gonna buckle under pressure, because you don't want to say the wrong thing. But in fact, you will say the wrong thing, because that's what you do under pressure. So you need to so you need to really, really be 100% sure that when you're talking about it to the assessor, that you know exactly what you're talking about from A to Z. Because if you don't, that means your funding will not be what you want. So what happens is that after, when the assessor comes in and they'll evaluate the actual assessment, is that they'll go, okay, this is what this person gets. You get the report back, but if you don't like the actual funding that you get, you can't actually appeal, which is nuts, because you need to have that flexibility and that empowerment to say to yourself, okay, I got this one wrong, or the assessor got wrong, can we please get it fixed up, because it's not going to help my disability going forward. So we don't have a lot of choices at the moment.
And
hang on, I'll just pause this.
as I was trying to say previously, there was actually a family with autism spectrum disorder, and they had an instance with the independent assessments where a physiotherapist who had nothing at all to do with condition, walked into their home, didn't introduce himself, simply sat down at their kitchen table in their home, and they're one of those people that already have social anxiety and things like that. So they literally sat down at the table, plugged the laptop in, didn't even ask if the person minded if they did so. After some prodding, he basically he wouldn't say his name or when the assessment began, and he basically let's just say he didn't really listen to any of the concerns the person had, and the report ended up being completely inaccurate. And part of that is because a physiotherapist isn't obviously going to understand, someone who clearly has a, I would say, a mental disorder. Whereas, you need someone like a psychologist to do that. And they're getting, the problem is they're getting like psychologists to do, things that an OT or a physio should do. And it's just the wheels are really falling off the trolley, because the other problem is that all of those, the questions that they ask are very yes or no questions. So there's no room to explain yourself. It's pretty much, can you do this? Or, can you not? It's very yes or no. There's no yes with difficulty or no, I can't unless I have X, Y, Z. So the best advice I was ever given is when you get this independent assessment done, and I'd say this for anyone listening, if you have difficulty doing something, just simply say no. Say no and you'll get what you need.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that, like, what is the future with this new scheme about OTs and support workers? What is their role going forward? Like, it's sort of like taking their empowerment away as well. It's not just about disabilities, it's about other support services that are going to be affected by this. Because what happens if the assessment goes, okay, you need help with this sort of problem, but you can't explain it because you don't really have good communication skills. But if you had the OT with you, they could explain it. Now, they don't want people to come with you to the assessment room. They want you or your carer, but that's about it. They don't want anyone else outside of that bubble. So that's going to be very, very difficult to juggle. And it's going to be one of the most really, really hard things to assess.
And if I may, be as bold as to say so, the ability to, take away a person's rights to appeal a decision, to an independent body, I would actually say, and this is going to sound strong, but I believe it's almost not only inhumane, but it's almost something you would expect from a communist government, because in any Western, democracy that believes in a freedom of speech and opinion, you would have the fundamental right, even currently under the UN, you have the right to appeal a decision. You have the right to a fair trial. And basically, it's almost like what, the NDIs is, or the government, I should say, is allowing the NDIs to do, is to say, you are not, you do not have rights. You do not have the right to a fair trial or to have an opinion or to appeal a decision. I mean, if for example, we did that in the, for example, the criminal justice system, people would be up in arms and there would be,
absolutely
storming, Parliament in Canberra like they did, with the Capitol riots in America. But, the moment people talk about that regarding, the NDIS, and it's only, a small minority that really bat an eyelid.
So just going forward from that, questions about the actual impact on support workers, we are very fortunate that we have Zeke and Charmel, who are actual support workers who work in the disability sector. I was going to ask the two of them, what do you feel the impact of this NDI scheme is going to be like moving forward?
Well, for me, I think with this one, because we are mostly helping these people, and how can we help fully help these people or support them if this kind of changes, because all the time on the way we support people with disability, we always make sure that we include them in their decision making. We always make sure that we are open. They are open for choices. We give them choices, and in order to do that, so if we're going to if this scheme, I think it will impact us as well, because if some of the funding that is not allocated, I don't know how I'm gonna say this, but um if the funding is not that enough, or there's some funding that the client is supposed to have that kind of activity, but it's not funded by the government, then that uh, our support will be limited. Instead of supporting the client, the giving the whole full support, it's gonna be limited.
Absolutely, and that's just and that's a frustrating aspect as well, because obviously having an independent assessor, that causes the gaps in between actually allowing us to assess the situation, because an independent assessor, like you guys are saying, will only assess so much within that period that they do assess you. So we don't have that ability to go in and say, hey, we have all this information now, but now that you're independently assessed, we can only provide you with this because you have funds for that and that and that. So, it causes a huge gap. So it limits the amount we can provide our support, because to that extent, what we want to do is provide the best services, the best support, the best ability to help everyone achieve what their goals are, what their needs are. And without that, well, you're left in essentially what is a rut, because, I feel, personally, I feel they've taken the opportunity of COVID and really taken their time to limit a lot of accessibility and services through that. But that's a personal view of mine, that, something that I feel is a frustrating aspect of support work. And the government needs to really,
you're right.
The government needs to definitely step in and consider the whole process in a bit of a more, I guess, holistic nature, rather than just pushing it in and saying, this is what we have, this is what you can be provided, this is what we're going to do for you. It can't be a blanket. It has to be something that is equitable.
They have to think about the people who can articulate for themselves. So before doing this scheme, they should make more I don't know what they have to do more, but
Absolutely.
Because I think that it's also one of those things, like I think the government's kind of looking at the whole NDIS and in relation to the pandemic even the wrong way. I think they not only need to pump more money into it, if that's possible, and I'm sure that it is, but the reality is they also need to like the NDIS needs to use all this kind of thing to their advantage. So for example, at the moment I'm dealing with an OT regarding SDA, so like supported disability accommodation. Now, the advantage that they have with that during COVID is rather than having an occupational therapist come out and actually observe me and then write it down, they're actually getting us to take photos and videos that they'll include in their report, so that the NDIS gets to see that as well. So rather than just having text on a page, the NDIS will actually get pictures to say, oh, this is actually where you live. This is a video of you actually walking. So it'll almost be the equivalent of having an NDIS assessor come out to your home and observe you, for a whole 24 hours, essentially.
Absolutely.
So rather than just being a report reference number, you're actually looked at like a real person, and the reviewer actually gets to see your day-to-day struggles.
And again, that's part of the problem, because now when you got this independent assessor, you can't actually, you might not even have the materials ready to actually take a photograph of this and this and this, because you're under pressure answering questions, and then you got to get all this extra information. already put down.
Yeah.
But sometimes you're going to forget, and that's where the problem is. You don't have any backups.
I guess.
And the thing is too, as weird as an analogy as it's going to be, if you think about the government system, the NDS, like for example, your liver. Your liver is a very resilient organ in your body. But the thing is, if you fill it with garbage and then take away the nutrients and the things that actually needs to function, eventually you're just, kicking it when it's down to the point where it's eventually going to fail you and you're going to die. And I think it's one of those things where if the government, makes, too many tweaks to the NDIS that aren't favorable to us, eventually, it's just going to be like a fatty liver that's eventually going to,
Collapse.
kill the body that it's in. Because the thing is, it won't be functional, or, I would even argue, if the NDI so limits itself to the support that can be provided, it's not going to be worth someone doing all the paperwork just to get the few things that they can get.
No, and the other issue is that they also, the independent assessors also determine whether or not you actually stay on the NDIS as well. So you could have a permanent condition and they can turn around and say, no, sorry, you're not able to fit in the criteria, so you're off the NDIS. So, and that's even worse.
And the funny thing is, and I should mention this, Tom, I don't know if anyone wants to look this up, this is fine. I don't know if this is actual fact, but it's speculated in the media that the government wants to sneak in a nice little law that will actually boot people with psychosocial or intellectual disabilities off the NDIS by making changes, because the idea is what they want to do is filter anyone out that they deem doesn't really need the NDIS for the purposes of having like a physical disability, in order to take pressure off the system. But I think the reality is, and I even said this to my wife the other day, if I absolutely had to, what I'd rather do is, better the system that we already have. And if I absolutely had to make a contribution, I'd rather just pay like even a monthly fee out of my Centrelink, or pay like you would when you take out an insurance policy. You either pay like a month-to-month fee, or you pay like a small lump sum as a contribution and get all the funds that you need, and then have it renewed every 12 months and adjusted accordingly.
Now, we were just talking about how to improve the NDIS as a system. One of the recommendations that I came up with was, say for example, and this is what happened to me last year, I had to have extra sessions of physiotherapy just so I can, be able to move around, because in lockdown you couldn't move around, you couldn't go to gym, you couldn't do social activities. So my body was getting very, very sore. And it got to the point where I started to run out of my physio funding. But the thing was, how there's a social activity like sort of area where you can get funding from in that pool. I couldn't access those services, but the thing is, it needs to be more flexible, because if you can't access the social sort of like areas to do your programs, and that creates the funding from those areas, you need to be able to put the money somewhere else. So then you're not wasting that money that could be used in other areas to benefit your health. So my suggestion is, if you're not going to use that money in that particular area that you originally planned for, use it to somewhere else that you are going to plan to use it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Storm, it's funny that you mentioned that, because they actually did, during COVID, when the pandemic got really bad, they actually did do that for a while. So what the NDIs did was they made your whole, I don't know if you remember, but there were certain parts of your plan that obviously weren't flexible and couldn't be transferred between categories. But what they did for a while was they basically made your whole core budget flexible, so you could basically transfer it into consumables and things like that, and it worked for a while. The problem that I found, particularly, and I'm sure many other people had this problem, is when you have to shut down things like gyms, you know, the person might have all this funding, but they can't use it with their physiotherapist because there's nowhere for them to do exercise. And the one fundamental mistake.
Absolutely. I was very lucky, Nathan, in the sense that my funding was coming up to a renewal. So when the pandemic was finished, it was actually up to 100%. But I was just really concerned that with the actual physiotherapy up to the 100% limit, that I wasn't able to use it for my daily activities, because I needed to work on other things like my mental health as well. And it was very, very difficult because you don't have the space or the pool to use that money in the areas that you need in that time. So,
And I think the fundamental mistake that, I don't know what you guys think about this, but I think the fundamental mistake that, you know, governments made when they shut down the gyms is that no one sat there and thought that rather than completely close down gyms, why don't they just essentially say, well, you may only go to the gym if you have a disability, you know, that requires you to undertake gym sessions in order to keep going, so to speak. So, you know, like, because for example, so you might have someone who can show, well, if I stop going to the gym, I will, you know, I'll basically, my bones or my joints will seize up. I won't, you know, be able to think properly, things like that. So basically what they should have done is said only people that, you know, have a necessity or sorry, what am I trying to say? Like a medical need that's disability related, you know, may only attend gyms and things like that. So you basically filter out the people that don't need it, and you keep the people, you know, like us, where it's kind of essential.
Okay, so just really quickly, what are the biggest takeaways can we take away from today's session regarding the NDIS? I actually think the biggest takeaways at the moment is the fact that the system is flawed. The system is flawed to the fact that it only helps you if you're in the scope of the system. It doesn't actually help you if you need other things outside the system. And that's where the conflict is at the moment, and they still haven't worked that out, because each individual has a different disability based on their different needs. And we know our bodies better than anyone else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think a massive takeaway is the fact that the independent assessors need to really be applicable as to what an individual's needs are. So you shouldn't have someone who deals in the field of psychology coming to someone who's, you know, physically disabled, or a certain aspect around that area. So I think it should be much more catered, much more individualized, much more personalized.
Absolutely. It's like saying to us, your only treatment for your condition is physiotherapy. And there's other treatments like osteopath, and exercise physiologist. These are different types of experts that come into the field, but the NDIS fails to recognize these treatments, and they don't include it into the plan.
And it's one of those things with, you know, and as, you know, a Christian, I have a real, you know, gripe about this, but it's one of those things with the independent assessments. I believe in, you know, telling the whole truth in context. So in my mind, even though, for example, let's say they have a yes, no scale, and I find a task difficult, my, you know, moral compass, so to speak, goes, well, am I technically lying if I say I can't do something, even though I can do something, but I need assistance, or I can do it with great difficulty? So it's one of those things where it's like, when you say yes or no, it's like, well, no matter what I do, I can't tell the complete truth in context.
Absolutely. And that's a big problem. That's a big problem.
Yep. Awesome. Well, this has been fantastic, everyone. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining us in this podcast today. So happy to have had everyone here. So
this is a
it's been
very
good fun.
interesting
It's been good fun.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Very informative. So everyone out there, please like, comment, subscribe as well, and please feel free to share your opinions upon the NDIS and how you feel these changes will affect individuals and yourselves. And thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for watching.
Bye.
Bye.